Learn English through Stories H32 PDF. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents: Incident on the Kalka train, 1, 1, 2, and 3. 2. Grammar page. 1. Incident on the Kalka train, Part 1. By Satyajit. 1. I had only just finished reading a hair-raising account of an expedition by Captain Scott. Who knew I would have to travel to the land of mist and snow so soon after this? Well, no, I don't mean the North or the South Pole. I don't think Feluda would ever be required to help solve mysteries in such remote corners. The place I am talking about is in our own country. Here I saw snowflakes floating down from the sky like cotton fluff. It spread on the ground like a carpet, dazzling my eyes as the sun fell on it, yet it stayed soft enough to be scooped and gathered into a ball. This particular adventure started last March on a Thursday morning. By this time, Feluda had become fairly well known as a detective, so his number of clients had grown. But he didn't accept a case unless it was one that gave him the chance to sharpen his remarkable brain. When I first heard about this case, it did not strike me as anything extraordinary. But Feluda must have sensed a great challenge, which was why he agreed so readily. The only other factor that might have influenced his decision was that the client seemed to be pretty well off, so perhaps he was expecting a fat fee. However, when I mentioned this to Feluda, he gave me such a glare that I had to shut up immediately. The client was called Dinanath Lahiri. He rang us in the evening on Wednesday and made an appointment for 8 o'clock the following morning. On the dot of 8 on Thursday, we heard a car stop and blow its horn outside our house in Tara Road. The horn sounded strangely different from other cars. I sprang to my feet and moved towards the door, but Feluda stopped me with a gesture. "You must learn," he said, "to play it cool, at least wait till the bell rings." It rang in a few seconds. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was a huge car. Never before had I seen such a big car, except for a Rolls-Royce. The gentleman who emerged from it was equally impressive, though that had nothing to do with his size. A man in his mid-50s, he had a remarkably fair complexion and was wearing a fine dhoti and kurta. On his feet were white nagras with an upturned front. In his left hand was a walking stick with an ivory handle, and in his right hand he held a blue square attaché case of a type which I had seen many times before. There were two in our own house. One was Baba's, the other belonged to Feluda. They were handed out by Air India as free gifts to their passengers. Feluda offered the gentleman the most comfortable armchair in the living room and took an ordinary chair himself to sit opposite him. "I rang last night," said our visitor. "My name is Dinanath Lahiri." Feluda cleared his throat and said, "Before you say anything further, may I ask you a couple of questions?" "Of course." "First of all, would you mind having a cup of tea?" Mr. Lahiri folded his hands, bent his head politely, and replied, "You must forgive me, Mr. Mitter. I am not used to having anything except at certain hours. But please don't let me stop you from having a cup of tea if you so wish." "All right. My second question is your car a Hispano Suiza?" "Yes, that's right. There aren't too many of those in this country. My father bought it in 1934. Are you interested in cars?" Feluda smiled. "Yes, among other things, but my interests are chiefly related to my profession." "I see. Allow me now to tell you why I'm here. You may find the whole thing totally insignificant. I am aware of your reputation, so there's no way I can insist that you take the case. I can only make a request." There was a certain polish and sophistication in his voice and the way he spoke, but not even the slightest trace of arrogance. On the contrary, Mr. Lahiri spoke gently and quietly. "Let's hear the details of your case," said Feluda. "You may call it my case," said Mr. Lahiri with a smile, pointing at the blue object in his hand, Or the tale of my attaché case. Aha, you see, my story revolves round this attaché case. Faluda glanced at the case and said, "It seems to have gone abroad few times. The tags are torn, but I can see the elastic bands on the handle. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, the handle of my own case also has elastic bands hanging from it." "Your own case? You mean this one isn't yours?" "No. This belongs to someone else. It got exchanged with mine." "I see. Where did this happen? In a plane, or was it a train?" "It was a train. Kalka mail. I was coming back from Delhi. There were 4 passengers in a first-class compartment, including myself. My attaché case must have got mixed up with one of the other 3. I assume you do not know whose it was?" "No. If I did, I don't suppose I'd need your help. And you don't know the names of the others?" "There was another Bengali. His name was Pakrashi. He traveled from Delhi like me." "How did you get to know his name?" "One of the other passengers happened to recognize him. I heard this other man say, 'Hello, Mr. Pakrashi,' and then they got talking. I think both were businessmen. I kept hearing words like contract and tender." "You didn't learn the name of this other man?" "No. He was not a Bengali, though he was speaking the language quite well. I gathered he came from Simla." "And the 4th passenger?" "He stayed on one of the upper berths most of the time. I saw him climb down only during lunch and dinner. He was not a Bengali either. He offered me an apple soon after we left Delhi and said it was from his own orchard. So perhaps he was from Simla too." "Did you eat that apple?" "Yes, certainly. It was a good, tasty apple." "So you don't mind eating things outside your regular hours when you're in a train?" Mr. Lahiri burst out laughing. "My God! I'd never have thought you'd pick that up. But you're right. In a moving train, I am tempted to break my own rules." "Okay," said Faluda. "I now need to know exactly who was sitting." "I was on a lower berth. Mr. Pakrashi was on the berth above mine. On the other side, the man who gave me the apple sat on the upper berth, and below him was the businessman who knew Mr. Pakrashi." Faluda was silent for a few moments. Then he rubbed his hands together and said, "If you don't mind, I am going to ask for some tea. Do have a cup if you want. Topsh, would you please go in?" I ran in to tell our cook Srinath to bring the tea. When I returned, Faluda had opened the attaché case. "Wasn't it locked?" he asked. "No, nor was mine. So whoever took it could easily have seen what was in it. This one is full of routine, ordinary stuff." "True. It contained little besides 2 English dailies, a cake of soap, a comb, a hairbrush, a toothbrush, toothpaste, a shaving kit, a handkerchief, and a paperback." "Did your case contain anything valuable?" Faluda wanted to know. "No, nothing. In fact, what my case had was probably of less value than what you see here. The only interesting thing in it was a manuscript. It was a travelogue about Tibet. I had taken it with me to read on the train. It made very good reading." "A travelogue about Tibet?" Faluda was now clearly curious. "Yes, it was written in 1917 by a Shambhucharan Bose, as far as I can make out. My uncle must have brought it, since it was dedicated to him. His name was Satyajit Lahiri. He had lived in Kathmandu for many years, working as a private tutor in the household of the Ranas. He returned home about 45 years ago, a sick old man. In fact, he died shortly after his return. Among his belongings was a Nepali box. It lay in a corner of our box room. We had all forgotten its existence until recently, when I called the pest control. The room had to be emptied for the men to work in. It was then that I found the box and in it, the manuscript." "When did this happen?" "The day before I left for Delhi." Faluda grew a little thoughtful. Shambochan, he muttered to himself. Shambochan. Shambochan. Anyway, continued Mr. Lahiri, that manuscript does not mean very much to me, to tell you the truth. I wasn't really interested in getting my attaché case back. Besides, there was no guarantee that I would find the owner of the one that got exchanged with mine, so I gave this case to my nephew. But since last night I have been thinking, these articles that you see before you may not be expensive, but for their owner they might have a great deal of sentimental value. Look at this handkerchief, for instance. It's initialed G. Someone had embroidered the letter with great care. Who could it be? His wife. Perhaps she is no more. Who knows? Shouldn't I try to return this attaché case to its rightful owner? I was getting worried, so I took it back from my nephew and came to you. Frankly, I don't care if my own case does not come back to me. I would simply feel a lot more comfortable if this one could be restored to whoever owns it. Srinath came in with the tea. Faluda, of late, had become rather fussy about his tea. What he was now going to drink had come from the Makabariti estate of Krishian. Its fragrance filled the room the instant Srinath placed the cups before us. Faluda took a sip quietly and said, "Did you have to open your case quite a few times in the train?" "No, not at all. I opened it only twice. I took the manuscript out soon after the train left Delhi, and then I put it back before going to sleep." Faluda lit a charminar and blew out a couple of smoke rings. "So you'd like me to return this case to its owner and get yours back for you, right?" "Yes. But does that disappoint you? Do you think it's all a bit too tame?" Faluda ran his fingers through his hair. "No," he said. "I understand your sentiments, and I must admit that your case is different from the ones I usually handle." Dinanath Babu looked visibly relieved. "Your acceptance means a lot to me," he said, letting out a deep breath. "I shall of course do my best," Faluda replied, "but I cannot guarantee success. You must understand that. However, I should now like some information." "Yes." Faluda rose quickly and went into the next room. He returned with his famous blue notebook. Then, pencil in hand, he began asking questions. "When did you leave Delhi?" "On 5 March at 6:30 p.m. I reached Calcutta the next morning at 9:30. Today is the 9th, so you arrived here 3 days ago and you rang me yesterday." Faluda opened the attaché case and took out a yellow Kodak film container. As he unscrewed its lid, a few pieces of betel nut fell out of it on the table. Faluda put one of these in his mouth and resumed speaking. "Was there anything in your case that might give one an idea of your name and address?" "No, not as far as I can recall." "HM, could you now please describe your fellow passengers?" Dinanath Babu tilted his head and stared at the ceiling, frowning a little. "Pakrashi would have been about the same age as me, between 60 and 65. He had salt and pepper hair, brushed back. He wore glasses and his voice was rather harsh." "Good." "The man who offered me the apple had a fair complexion. He was tall and slim, had a sharp nose, wore gold-framed glasses, and was quite bald except for a few strands of black hair around his ears. He spoke to me only in English with a flawless accent. And he had a cold. He kept blowing his nose into a tissue." "A Pukka Sahib, I see. And the third gentleman?" "His appearance was really quite ordinary. There was nothing that one might have noticed in particular. But he was the only one who ordered a vegetarian thali." Faluda jotted all this down in his notebook. Then he looked up and asked, "Anything else?" "No, I can't recall anything else worth reporting. You see, I spent most of the day reading. And I fell asleep soon after dinner. I don't usually sleep very well in a train. But this time I slept like a baby until we arrived at Howrah. In fact, it was Mr. Pakrashi who woke me up." In that case, presumably you were the last person to leave the coach? Yes. By which time one of the other three had walked out with your attaché case? Yes. Faluda said, shutting his notebook. I'll see what I can do. Dinanath Babu rose. I will of course pay your fee. But you will naturally need something to begin your investigation. I brought some cash today for this purpose. He took out a white envelope from his pocket and offered it to Faluda, who took it coolly with a casual, "Oh, thanks," and stuffed it into his own pocket together with his pencil. Dinanath Babu came out and began walking towards his car. You will get my telephone number from the directory, he said. Please let me know if you hear anything. As a matter of fact, you can come straight to my house if need be. I am usually home in the evening. The yellow Hispano Suiza disappeared in the direction of Rashbihari Avenue, blowing its horn like a conch shell, startling all passers-by. We returned to the living room. Faluda took the chair Dinanath Babu had occupied. Then he crossed his legs, stretched lazily, and said, "Another 25 years, and people with such an aristocratic style will have vanished." The blue case was still lying on the table. Faluda took its contents out one by one. Each object was really quite ordinary. Whoever bought them could not have spent more than 50 rupees. "Let's make a list," said Faluda. This was soon ready, and it contained the following. 2 English dailies from Delhi, neatly folded. One was the Sunday Statesman, the other the Sunday Hindustan Times. A half-used tube of Bainaka toothpaste. The empty portion had been rolled up. A green Bainaka toothbrush. A Gillette safety razor. 3 thin Gillette blades in a packet. An old and used Old Spice shaving cream. It was nearly finished. A shaving brush. A nail cutter, pretty old. 3 tablets of Espro wrapped in a cellophane sheet. A folded map of Calcutta. It measured 4x5 when opened. A Kodak film container with chopped betel nuts in it. A matchbox, brand new. A Venus red and blue pencil. A white handkerchief with the letter G embroidered in one corner. A penknife, possibly from Moradabad. A small face towel. A rusted old safety pin. 3 equally rusted paper clips. A shirt button. A detective novel, Ellery Queen's The Door Between. Faluda picked up the book and turned a few pages. "No, there's no mention of the owner's name," he said, "but he clearly had the habit of marking a page by folding its corner. There are 236 pages in this book. The last sign of folding is at page 212. I assume he finished reading it." Faluda now turned his attention to the handkerchief. The first letter of his name or surname must be G. No, it must be his first name. That's far more natural. Then he opened the map of Calcutta and spread it on the table. "Red marks," he said, looking closely at it. "Someone marked it with a red pencil. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, HM, Chowring He, Park Street, I see Topsh, get the telephone directory." Faluda put the map back into the case. Then he began turning the pages of the telephone directory. Here we are," he said. "There are only 16 Pakrashis listed here. 2 of them are doctors, so we can easily leave them out." "Why?" "The man who recognized him in the train called him Mr. Pakrashi, not doctor, remember?" "Oh yes, that's right." Faluda picked up the telephone and began dialing. Each time he got through, I heard him say, "Has Mr. Pakrashi returned from Delhi? Oh, sorry." This happened 5 times in a row. But the 6th number he dialed apparently got him the right man, for this time he spoke for much longer. Then he said, "Thanks," and put the phone down. "I think I've got him," he said to me. "N.C. Pakrashi," he answered the phone himself. "He returned from Delhi by Kalka mail the day before yesterday. Everything tallies, except that his luggage didn't get exchanged. Then why did you make an appointment with him this evening? Why, he can give us some information about the other passengers, can't he? He appears to be an ill-tempered fellow, but it would take more than ill temper to put fellow Mitter off. Come, Topsh, let's go out. Now? I thought we were meeting Mr. Pakrashi in the evening? Yes, but before calling on Pakrashi, I think we need to visit your Uncle Sidhu. Now. 2. Uncle Sidhu was no relation. He used to be Baba's next-door neighbor when he lived in our old ancestral home, long before I was born. Baba treated him like a brother, and we all called him Uncle. Uncle Sidhu's knowledge about most things was extraordinary, and his memory remarkably powerful. Faluda and I both admired and respected him enormously. But why did Faluda want to see him at this time? The first question Faluda asked made that clear. Have you heard of a travel writer called Shambhocharan Bose? He used to write in English about 60 years ago. Uncle Sidhu's eyes widened. Good heavens, fellow, haven't you read his book on the Terre? Oh yes, said Faluda. Now I do remember. The man's name sounded familiar, but no, I haven't read the book. It was called The Terrors of Terre. A British publisher in London published it in 1915. Shambhocharan was both a traveler and a shikari. But by profession he was a doctor. He used to practice in Kathmandu. This was long before the present royal family came into power. The powerful people in Nepal then were the Ranas. Shambhocharan treated and cured a lot of ailments among the Ranas. He mentioned one of them in his book, Vijayendra Shamshir Jung Bahadur. The man was keen on hunting, but he drank very heavily. Apparently, he used to climb a machin with a bottle in one hand and a rifle in the other. But both his hands stayed steady when it came to pressing the trigger. Except once. Only once did he miss, and the tiger jumped up on the machin. It was Shambhocharan who shot the tiger from the next machin and saved the Rana's life. The Rana expressed his gratitude by giving him a priceless jewel. A most thrilling story. Try and get a copy from the National Library. I don't think you'll get it easily anywhere else. Did he ever go to Tibet? Yes, certainly. He died in 1921, soon after I finished college. I saw an obituary on him, I remember. It said he had gone to Tibet after his retirement, although he died in Kathmandu. I see. Faluda remained silent for a few moments. Then he said in a clear, distinct tone, supposing an unpublished manuscript was discovered today, written after his visit to Tibet, would that be a valuable document? My goodness! Uncle Sidhu's bald dome glistened with excitement. You don't know what you're saying, fellow. Valuable? I still remember the very high praise Terry had received from the London Times. It wasn't just the stories he told. Shambhocharan's language was easy, lucid, and clear as crystal. Why, have you found such a manuscript? No, but there might be one in existence. If you can lay your hands on it, please don't forget to show it to me, fellow. And in case it gets auctioned, let me know. I'd be prepared to bid up to 5,000 rupees. We left soon after this, but not before 2 cups of cocoa had been pressed upon us. Mr. Lahiri doesn't even know his attaché case contains such hot stuff, I said as we came out. Aren't you going to tell him? Wait. There's no need to rush things. Let's see where all this leads to. In any case, I have taken the job, haven't I? It's just that now I feel a lot more enthusiastic. Naresh Chandra Pakrashi lived in Lansdowne Road. It was obvious that his house had been built at least 40 years ago. Faluda had taught me how to assess the age of a house. For instance, houses built 50 years ago had a certain type of window, which was different from those built 10 years later. The railings on verandas and terraces, patterns on gates, pillars at porticos, all bore evidence of the period a building was made. This particular house must have been built in the 1920s. The first thing I noticed as we climbed out of our taxi was a notice outside the main gate: "Beware of the dog." "It would have made better sense," remarked Faluda, "if it had said, 'Beware of the owner of the dog.'" We passed through the gate and found a chowkidar standing near the porch. Faluda gave him his visiting card, which bore the legend, "Pradosh C. Mitter, Private Investigator." The chowkidar disappeared with the card and reappeared a few minutes later. "Please go in," he said. We had to cross a wide marble landing before we got to the door of the living room. It must have been about 10 feet high. We lifted the curtain and walked in, to be greeted by rows and rows of books, all stashed in huge almirahs. There was quite a lot of other furniture, a wall-to-wall carpet, pictures on the walls, and even a chandelier. But the whole place had an unkempt air. Apparently, no one cared to clean it regularly. We found Mr. Pakrashi in his study, hidden behind the living room. The sound of typing had already reached our ears. Now we saw a man sitting behind an ancient typewriter, which rested on a massive table covered with green rixine. The table was placed on the right. On our left, as we stepped in, we saw 3 couches and a small round table. On this one stood a chessboard with all the chessmen in place, and a book on the game. The last thing my eyes fell on was a large dog, curled up and asleep in one corner of the room. The man fitted Dinanath Babu's description. A pipe hung from his mouth. He stopped typing upon our entry, and his eyes swept over us both. "Which one of you is Mr. Mitter?" he finally asked. Perhaps it was his idea of a joke, but Faluda did not laugh. He answered civilly enough, "I am Pradosh Mitter. This is my cousin." "How was I to know?" said Mr. Pakrashi. "Little boys have gone into so many different things: music, acting, painting. Why, some have even become religious gurus, so your cousin here might well have been the great sleuth himself. But anyway, tell me why you're here. What do you want from a man who's never done anything other than mind his own business?" Faluda was right. If ever a competition was held in irascibility, this man would have been a world champion. "Who did you say sent you here?" he wanted to know. "Mr. Lahiri mentioned your name. He arrived from Delhi 3 days ago. You and he traveled in the same compartment." "I see. And is he the one whose attaché case got lost?" "Not lost, merely mistaken for someone else's." "Careless fool. But why did he have to employ you to retrieve it? What precious object did it contain?" "There was nothing much, really, except an old manuscript. There is no other copy." I could tell why Faluda mentioned the manuscript. If he told Mr. Pakrashi the real reason why he had been employed, no doubt Mr. Pakrashi would have laughed in derision. "Manuscript?" he asked somewhat suspiciously. "Yes. A travelogue written by Shambhocharan Bose. Mr. Lahiri had read it on the train, then put it back in the case." "Well, the man is not just a fool, he seems to be a liar too. You see, although I had an upper berth, I spent most of the day sitting right next to him. He never read anything other than a newspaper and a Bengali magazine." Faluda did not say anything. Mr. Pakrashi paused for breath, then continued, "I don't know what you'd make of it as a sleuth. I find the whole thing distinctly suspicious. Anyway, if you wish to go on a wild goose chase, suit yourself. I cannot offer any help. I told you on the phone I have about 3 of those Air India bags, but on this trip I didn't take any with me." "One of the other passengers knew you, didn't he?" "Who? Mohan?" "Yes. He is a moneylender. I've had a few dealings with him." "Could he have had a blue case?" "How on earth should I know?" Mr. Pakrashi frowned darkly. "Could you give me Mohan's telephone number?" "Look it up in the directory." SM Kidia and Co. SM was Bremohan's father. Their office is in Lenin Sarani. And one more thing. You're wrong in thinking I knew only one of the other passengers. As a matter of fact, I knew two of them. Who's the second one? Faluda sounded surprised. Dinanath Lahiri. I had seen him before at the races. He used to be quite a lad. Now I believe he's changed his lifestyle and even found himself a guru in Delhi. Heaven knows if any of this is true. What about the fourth man in your coach? Asked Faluda. He was obviously trying to gain as much information as he could. What's going on? Shouted Mr. Pakrashi, pulling a face, in spite of the pipe still hanging from his mouth. Are you here simply to ask questions? Am I an accused standing trial or what? No, sir, said Faluda calmly. I am asking these questions only because you play chess all by yourself. You clearly have a sharp brain, a good memory, and... Mr. Pakrashi thawed a little. He cleared his throat and said, Chess has become an addiction. The partner I used to play with is no more, so now I play alone. Every day? Yes. Another reason for that is my insomnia. I play until about 3 in the morning. Do you never take a pill to help you sleep? I do sometimes. But it doesn't always help. Not that it matters. I go to bed at 3 and rise at 8. 5 hours is good enough at my age. Is typing also one of your addictions? Faluda asked with his lopsided smile. No, but there are times when I do like to do my own typing. I have a secretary who's pretty useless. Anyway, you were talking about the fourth passenger, weren't you? He had sharp features, was quite bald, a non-Bengali, spoke very good English and offered me an apple. I didn't eat it. What else would you like to know? I am 53 and my dog is 3.5. He's a boxer and doesn't like visitors to stay for more than half an hour. So. An interesting man, Faluda remarked. We were out in the street, but not walking in the direction of home. Why Faluda chose to go in the opposite direction I could not tell, nor did he make any attempt at hailing either of the two empty taxis that sailed by. One little thing was bothering me. I had to mention it to Faluda. Didn't Dinanath Babu say he thought Pakrashi was about 60, but Mr. Pakrashi himself said he was 53, and quite frankly, he didn't seem older than that. Isn't that funny? All it proves is that Dinanath Babu's power of observation is not what it should be, said Faluda. A couple of minutes later, we reached Lower Circular Road. Faluda turned left. Are you going to look at that case of robbery? I asked. Only 3 days ago, the papers had reported a case of a daylight robbery. Apparently, 3 masked men had walked into a jeweler's shop on Lower Circular Road and got away with a lot of valuable jewelry and precious stones, firing recklessly in the air as they made their escape in a black ambassador car. It might be fun tracing those daredevils, Faluda had said. But sadly, no one had come forward to ask him to investigate. So I thought perhaps he was going to ask a few questions on his own. But Faluda paid no attention to me. It seemed as though his sole purpose in life, certainly at that moment, was to get some exercise, and so he would do nothing but continue to walk. A little later, he turned left again rather abruptly and walked briskly into the Hindustan International Hotel. I followed him quickly. Did anyone from Simla check in at your hotel on 6 March? Faluda asked the receptionist. His first name starts with a G. I'm afraid I can't recall his full name. Neither Bremohan nor Nersh Pakrashi had names that started with a G. So this had to the Appawala. The receptionist looked at his book. There are 2 foreigners listed here on 6 March, he said. Gerald Prattley and G.R. Holmes. Both came from abroad. Thank you, said Faluda and left. We took a taxi as we came out. Park Hotel, Faluda said to the driver and lit a Charminar. "If you had looked carefully at those red marks on the map," he said to me, "you'd have seen they were markers for hotels. It's natural that the man would want to stay at a good hotel. At present, there are 5 well-known hotels in Calcutta: Grand, Hindustan International, Park, Great Eastern, and Ritz Continental, and those red marks had been placed on these. The Park Hotel would be our next port of call." As it turned out, no one with a name starting with G had checked in at the Park on 6 March. But the Grand offered some good news. Feluda happened to know one of its Bengali receptionists called Das Gupta. He showed us their visitors book. Only one Indian had checked in on the 6th. He did arrive from Simla, and his name was G.C. Damija. "Is he still here?" "No, sir. He checked out yesterday." The little flicker of hope in my mind was snuffed out immediately. Feluda, too, was frowning. But he didn't stop asking questions. Which room was he in? "Room 216. "Is it empty now?" "Yes. We're expecting a guest this evening, but right now it's vacant." "Can I speak to the room boy?" "Certainly. I'll get someone to show you the way." We took the lift up to the 2nd floor. A walk down a long corridor finally brought us to room 216. The room boy appeared at this point. We went into the room with him. Feluda began pacing. "Can you remember the man who left yesterday? He was staying in this room." "Yes, sir." "Now try to remember carefully. What luggage did he have?" "A large suitcase and a smaller one." "Was it blue?" "Yes. When I came back to the room after filling his flask, I found him taking things out of the blue case. He seemed to be looking for something." "Very good. Can you remember if this man had a few apples, perhaps in a paper bag?" "Yes, there were 3 apples. He took them out and kept them on a plate." "What did this man look like?" But the description the room boy gave did not help. At least 100,000 men in Calcutta would have fitted that description. However, there was reason to feel pleased. We now had the name and address of the man whose attaché case had got exchanged with Mr. Lahiri's. Mr. Dasgupta gave us a piece of paper as we went out. I glanced over Feluda's shoulder and saw what was written on it. G.C. Damija, the Nook. Wildflower Hall, Simla. 3. Kalka has gone out. He'll return around 7, we were told. So this was Dinanath Babu's nephew. We had come straight from the Grand Hotel to Dinanath Babu's house to report our progress, stopping on our way only to buy some Metha Pan from a shop outside the New Empire. Lined on one side of the gate of Mr. Lahiri's house were 4 garages. 3 of these were empty. The 4th contained an old, strange-looking car. "Italian," said Feluda. "It's a Lagonda." The chowkidar took our card in, but instead of Dinanath Babu, a younger man emerged from the house. He couldn't have been more than 30. Of medium height, he had fair skin like his uncle. His hair was long and tousled, and running down from his ears were broad sideburns, the kind that seemed to be all the rage among fashionable men. The man was staring hard at Feluda. "Could we please wait until he returns?" asked Feluda. "We have something rather important to discuss, you see." "Please come this way." We were taken into the living room. The walls and the floor were littered with tiger and bear skins. A huge head of a buffalo graced the wall over the main door. Perhaps Dinanath Babu's uncle had been a shikari too. Maybe that was why he and Shambhocharan had been so close. "My uncle goes out for a walk every evening. He'll be back soon." Dinanath Babu's nephew had an exceptionally thin voice. I wondered if it was he who had been given Mr. Damija's attaché case. "Are you," he asked, "the same fellow Mitter who solved the mystery of the Golden Fortress Yes, said Faluda briefly, and leant back in his chair, crossing his legs, perfectly relaxed. I kept looking at the other man. His face seemed familiar. Where had I seen him before? Then something seemed to jog my memory. Have you ever acted in a film? I asked. The man cleared his throat. Yes, in The Ghost. It's a thriller. I play the villain. But it hasn't yet been released. Your name? My real name is Prabir Lahiri, but my screen name is Amar Kumar. Oh yes, now I remember. I have seen your photograph in a film magazine. Heavens, what kind of a villain would he make with a voice like that? Are you a professional actor? Asked Faluda. For some strange reason, Prabir Babu was still standing. I have to help my uncle in his business, he replied, which means going to his plastic factory, but my real interest is in acting. What does your uncle think? Uncle isn't very enthusiastic about it. Why not? That's the way he is. Amar Kumar's face grew grave. Clearly, he had had arguments with his uncle over his career in films. I have to ask you something, Faluda said politely, possibly because Amar Kumar was beginning to look belligerent. I don't mind answering your questions, he said. What I can't stand is my uncle's constant digs at my. Did your uncle recently give you an Air India attaché case? Yes, but someone pinched it. We've got a new servant, you see. Faluda raised a reassuring hand and smiled. No, no one stole that case, I assure you. It's with me. With you? Prabir Babu seemed perfectly taken aback. Yes. Your uncle decided to return the case to its owner. He hired me for this purpose. What I want to know is whether you removed anything from it. I did, naturally. Here it is. Prabir Babu took out a ballpoint pen from his pocket. I wanted to use the blades and the shaving cream, he added, but of course I never got the chance. You do realize, don't you, that the case must go back to the owner with every item intact? Yes, yes, naturally. He handed the pen over to Faluda. But he was obviously still greatly annoyed with his uncle. At least, he muttered, I should have been told the case was going back. After all, he did give. He couldn't finish his sentence. Dinanath Babu's car sounded its horn at this moment, thereby causing the film villain to beat a quick retreat. Oh no, have you been waiting long? Dinanath Babu walked into the room, looking slightly rueful, his hands folded in a namaskar. We stood up to greet him. No, no, please sit down, he said hurriedly. You wouldn't mind a cup of tea, would you? His servant appeared almost immediately and left with an order to bring us tea. Dinanath Babu sat down on the settee next to ours. So, tell me, he invited. Your case got exchanged with the man who gave you the apple. His name is G.C. Damita. Dinanath Babu grew round-eyed. You found that out in just a day. What is this, magic? Faluda gave his famous lopsided smile and continued, he lives in Simla and I've got his address. He was supposed to spend 3 days at the Grand, but he left a day early. Has he left already? Dinanath Babu asked a little regretfully. Yes. He left the hotel, but we don't know whether he returned to Simla. One telegram to his house in Simla, and you shall get an answer to that. Dinanath Babu seemed to ponder for a few moments. Then he said, all right, I will send a cable today, but if I discover he has indeed gone back to Simla, I still have to return his case to him, don't I? Yes, of course. And yours has to come back to you. I am quite curious about that travelogue. Very good. Allow me to make a proposal, Mr. Mitter. Why don't you go to Simla with your cousin? I shall, of course, pay all your expenses. It's snowing in Simla, I hear. Have you ever seen it snow, Kalka? At any other time, I would have been affronted at being called a child. But now it did not seem to matter at all. Go to Simla? Oh, how exciting. My heart started to race faster. But Faluta's next words were most annoying. You must think this one through, Mr. Lahiri, he said. It's just a matter of taking an attaché case to Simla and bringing one back, isn't it, so anyone can do the job. It doesn't necessarily have to be me. No, 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 Dinanath Babu protested rather vehemently. Where will I find anyone as reliable as you? And since you began the investigation, I think you should end it. Why, you have a nephew, don't you? A shadow passed over Dinanath Babu's face. He is no good, really. I'm afraid my nephew's sense of responsibility is virtually non-existent. Do you know what he has done? He's gone into films. No, I cannot rely on him at all. I'd rather the two of you went. I'll tell my travel agents to make all arrangements. You can fly up to Delhi and then catch a train. When you've done your job, you can even have a holiday in Simla for a few days. It would give me a lot of pleasure to be of service to a man like you. What you've done in just a few hours is truly remarkable. The tea arrived together with cakes and sandwiches. Faluda picked up a piece of chocolate cake and said, "Thank you. There is one little thing I am still feeling curious about. The Nepali box in which you found the manuscript, is it possible to see it?" Of course. That's not a problem at all. I'll get my bearer to bring it. The box appeared in a few moments. About 2 feet in length and 10 inches in height, its wooden surface was covered by a sheet of copper. Red, blue, and yellow stones were set on the lid. The smell that greeted my nostrils as soon as the lid was lifted was the same as that in Naresh Bakrashi's study. Dust-covered old furniture and threadbare curtains gave out the same musty smell. Dinanath Babu said, "As you can see, there are 2 compartments in the box. The manuscript was in the first one, wrapped in a Nepali newspaper." "Good heavens, it's stuffed with so many different things," exclaimed Faluda. "Yes," Dinanath Babu smiled. "You might call it a mini curio shop, but it's so filthy I haven't felt tempted to handle anything." It turned out that the compartments could be removed. Faluda brought out the second one and inspected the objects it contained. There were stone necklaces, little engraved discs made of copper and brass, 2 candles, a small bell, a couple of little bowls, a bone of some unknown animal, a few dried herbs and flowers, reduced to dust, truly a little junk shop. "Did this box belong to your uncle?" "It came with him, so I assume it did." "When did he return from Kathmandu?" "In 1923. He died the same year. I was 7. "Very interesting," said Faluda. Then he took a last sip from his cup and stood up. "I accept your proposal, Mr. Lahiri," he said, "but we cannot leave tomorrow. We'll have to collect our warm clothes from the dry cleaners. The day after tomorrow might be a better idea, and please don't forget to cable Damija." We returned home at around 8:30 to find Jatayu waiting for us in the living room, a brown parcel on his lap. "Have you been to the pictures?" he asked with a smile. 2. Grammar page.